Can you sustain and improve upon small business culture through growth?
This podcast is brought to you by ArchiMed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of ArchiMed.
And I'm Caroline Squatrigo, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-size company culture. Join us.
So Caroline, what's the question of the day?
Today we are going to talk about how to maintain and nurture culture through growth. We will be speaking with Bill Oesterle, the former CEO of Angie's List and current CEO of TMap. We will also consult once again with Tim Fort. As a reminder, Tim holds the Eveleigh Professorship in Business Ethics and is a professor of business law and ethics at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University in Bloomington.
Yeah, Bill's going to be a great guest. His experience is broad and really on point for our question of the day. And I love talking to Tim, especially about those neurological numbers. It's going to be fun. ArchiMed started 9 years ago. It was a startup company, and we're maturing now into a new phase. And startup culture is not always a fit for a maturing company. And the analogy I like to use is Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. Steve Jobs was the right CEO for Apple at the time, with rapid growth and tons of innovation. And then the behemoth that it is now under Tim Cook, Tim's the right CEO for the job. And their two CEOs are completely different. And our company, ArchiMed, was a startup 9 years ago, and now we're employing about 100 people. And I was concerned about how to maintain that culture through growth. So that's why I asked this question. I spoke to Scott Dorsey from Exact Target, and that was a startup through scale experience as well. And he commented that culture has to change through that kind of growth, but that doesn't need to be a bad thing. And then I'm thinking about Tim Fort's neurological numbers, and as we get close to the 150, that's going to make change inevitable. So the big question is, how do we do it right? And I think we can learn from Bill. So let's talk to Bill.
Okay, we are here with Bill Oesterle. Bill was CEO of Angie's List for 16 years, and he is currently the CEO of TMap. TMap indexes and engages talent at scale using big data and machine learning. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Bill, you have done a lot in your career. You have worked in politics, you have worked in venture capital, and in industry. How have those experiences really shaped your philosophy on company culture?
Well, all of them have reinforced the importance of culture. Maybe venture capital gave me a crash course in that, because I was able to look at hundreds of companies, and I learned early that every company has a culture unique to that company, and they can be good, bad, or in between. And that left a meaningful impact on me when I began to put Angie's List together.
Yeah, Bill, I was in venture capital for a period of time as well, and I would echo that it had an impact on how I viewed company culture. The venture investors on the healthcare side, there was a bit of distance between the investor and the ownership group and the company below the C-level. And we were always sort of kept at the board table, and I don't think we walked the halls enough. I don't think we spent enough time with the line folks, the folks doing the good and hard work of the company. And so when I left venture to do other things, it was important for me to walk the floor, literally and figuratively walk the floor. And so that's what I learned from the venture side of things. I wanted to ask you about a technique you employed at Angie's List. I heard that every new employee, as part of the issuance of all their materials and things like that, got a laptop, and they opened up the laptop, and inside was a post-it note that said, "Enjoy your job or quit." So tell me, how did you end up coming to that tactic?
Yeah, actually, it was the screensaver that we put on their computer. So, yeah, I can't claim that idea. We hired our first HR director, and a wonderful woman, very good at her job. And she said, "Yeah, I'm going to put this on all the computers." I said, "That seems a little harsh." So she said, "No, it's not. People need to approach their work with an expectation of happiness and fun." And I thought about that a lot, and I agreed with it. And we used to not just put that on people's computers, we would explain to them in orientation why it was there. And that was a, one of the deep parts of our philosophy.
Wow, I really like that. Um, we have this concept of providing fulfillment to our employees, and that definition has a lot of aspects to it, and happiness is a part of it. But we really haven't communicated that proactively at an orientation or through an onboarding process. So I like the idea of openly and clearly and proactively discussing our goal of providing fulfillment to our employees through the onboarding process. That's Caroline. I think we should think about that.
Yeah, did it work well? Did people enjoy it?
Oh, yeah, I think you might have to ask them. But we worked, so venture taught me we had to manage culture or it would manage us. So we had to be overt about it. And we wanted to be clear, simple, principles based. So there wasn't ambiguity. We used simple words like fun and quit. And, number one was be honest, period. Not, ethics or, no, be honest. Be honest with yourself, be honest with your boss, be honest with our customers, your coworkers. That simple, honest. So we have pillars like that we really try to drive home. Um, it, our our HR onboarding felt like a kindergarten lesson because it was so simple and clear, but that's what we were shooting for.
I like that idea of making it so simple and easy that there's really people don't have to think about it, like it just kind of hits them in the face. I was talking to someone at Archimed about, color coding the other day, and for organizing, rather like, why are we trying to make things so difficult? Just color code it. And then you see green and you know what that means. But I think a lot of times we do try to overcomplicate things like that when we could just say, hey, have fun and be honest. So I like that. It sounds like between, your time in venture capital and then you mentioned the HR manager at Angie's List, you've had a lot of influences around culture in your life. Was there like one person who really taught you about culture or helped shape your philosophy, or one book that you read or anything like that that really pushed you to hold it with such importance?
No, I've had some phenomenal influences in my life. I've been incredibly fortunate to have worked around some highly, highly successful people. But honestly, I came into that process with an open curiosity about how is it that they motivate and influence and work with a team, their team. What constitutes leadership? And so I don't know that I'm an innovator more than a good thief. I have always tried to be perceptive of people's attributes so I can either steal them for myself or avoid them like the plague. And I came into this curious about that, and I think I've had keen observational skills. As I said in venture, I paid attention to what the cultures were like in those companies and tried to understand why they were that way. And then when I worked around Mitch Daniels or John Hackett from Cummins or Bob Orr, was always watching to see how they thought about these concepts.
So, Bill, at the beginning, Angie's List was a startup. So at the beginning, it was you could fit all around a conference table, and then obviously you had rapid growth through to a sale. What was the culture like at the beginning when you could all fit around that conference table?
Yeah, I'll take it back even further, Greg. It was just me and Angie at that table.
Wow.
And we had a conversation. And that conversation was, hey, if we're going to try this, we're going to actively devote time to culture. It's on the agenda.
Right at the beginning, at the very beginning, you knew you were going to concentrate on culture.
Yeah, well, we literally had that discussion because, as I said, you get one whether or not you manage it. So we knew that, and we said, okay, then we're at least going to try to manage it. So, in fact, if I have any advice, it's be as formal as you can about those discussions.
So I've heard a lot of just kind of like anecdotal stories about how quickly Angie's List grew. How fast did you grow in terms of headcount?
Well, it was in fits and starts. So, we were a 20-year overnight success, one of those things. So, but we figured we had a transition in 2009 where we realized that all of our little regional efforts added up to national. And we were growing 60 and 70% a year. And we were adding hundreds of people very rapidly.
How did you, I mean, you've talked a lot about actively managing your culture. So when you're growing that quickly, how did you actively manage it successfully?
Yeah, well, looking back, I'd say we had success, and we also had things I'd love to go back and do over again. We were able to rely on that principles-based, front-loaded training heavily when we were scaling up. And that worked very well. That made it. We had 4 or 5 principles. We pounded those in. We gave examples. We reinforced those throughout the year. That felt like an effective way to scale the message. The hard part was in our hiring, we struggle with centralizing that or decentralizing that. And when we centralize it, in my view, we sacrifice a lot of managerial discretion, and that made it harder. And we ended up moving back to decentralized hiring with what I'll call central support.
So that's really interesting. Did you also, in a sense, decentralize culture so that different departments or different geographies had different subcultures?
Yeah, that certainly happened. And Greg, philosophically, we want culture to be ground up, not top down. So everything we did, one example, tangible, one of our pillars or sayings was bring yourself to work. We want our culture to be the amalgamation of all the individuals, not something we cooked up and pushed down. And a byproduct of that was, teams had different nuances to them, and we celebrated those.
And at what size did you really think that culture needed to evolve? We've talked about this sort of neurological number where you get to a certain number, 150 is what the academics say is the size of an organization, and then you'll need to evolve. Did you find that that's also true, that there was a sort of a headcount size that triggered evolution of culture?
Yeah, we never thought of it quite that quantitatively, because it was so personality dependent too. We part of our culture was that we would work to accommodate true diversity. And by that, I mean, you could come in with a very different perspective on the world into our company, and we would attempt to figure out how to work with that and have you succeed. And we had some very high profile examples of people that just looked at things like no one else did, but they performed for us incredibly well. And because they could, they were fiercely loyal about their company. We always valued that, but that sort of disrupts this notion, well, there's 50 of us now, we better think about things differently. We have to think about them all the time if you're in an environment like that.
Yeah, that really resonates with me because I feel like ArchiMed is very much about like work however you need to work to get the job done. And that it kind of makes me think of that. You know, we're not going to tell you how you need to do something as long as you do it in the correct quality, the correct amount of time, all etc. You mentioned that you had successes and challenges and things that you would have done differently as you grew with culture. Can you share a story or two about one of those challenges that came because of growth?
Oh gosh, I'm sure I have too many, but in our the trickiest by far, though, the whole time we had an inside sales force, and we paid them incredibly well, and they worked incredibly hard. But man, were they a handful to manage. And if we love that about them, but a couple of times we took our eye off of something, and it would take us months to figure out what was happening. And because we were scaling so fast, we couldn't just stop and sit there and pick it apart. And so even more energy into kind of the support that was around that team. I would certainly invest more in that area if I had to go back.
Well, Bill, you as we said at the beginning, have a wide variety of experiences that have shaped how you view culture, and the Angie's List experience in particular, where it was started with you and Angie around a table, and already on your minds was culture. I wish I could say the same thing. I came to it a little bit late, but then you managed to harness growth and nurture that culture and manage that culture to a success. What advice would you give other business owners out there trying to preserve or perhaps evolve their culture as they grow?
Yeah, this notion of being deliberate, time on task. The more you sit down and talk about what you like, what you don't. We used to have a thing, one of my favorite. It was called Random Lunch. we gave you were randomly selected. I think it was once a quarter. The whole company did this. You were paired up with people you might or might not have known and sent out. We paid for your lunch. You specifically, they were mandatory. You had to figure out your team, pick the place. At some points, we had things you had to do, just to help break the ice, nothing heavy. And all those were dedicated to doing was fostering cross-departmental culture. Had no other purpose. And that just was a repetitive, somewhat disciplined, hey, culture is important. We want all of you to think about it. And, I had throughout the whole company history, I had built a radio which was open mic with the CEO. Anyone could tune in. I answered questions, listened to concerns. Just so we were, as you say, Gray, it was a version of walking the floor. What is going on at this company? How are we getting along? And that deliberate repetition of it, I think, isn't hard and forces good outcomes.
I know I saw Greg kind of laugh when you mentioned the lunch bill. Greg has pitched this idea to us so many times and we keep knocking it down. So I have a feeling with your backing it'll stick now. So I think he's excited.
Greg, you have to be fearless with this. You have to force people. This one is top down because they will naturally avoid it. And then they'll come back from them and talk about how great they are.
I think this is going to do it. Now that the idea came from Bill, I think it might stick. What do you think, Caroline?
I think so. I think you have the right ammunition now, Greg. Bill, thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot in our short time together, and I really appreciate you coming on. We will make sure to link to TMap in the bio for this episode. Is there anything else that you would like to plug or just let our listeners know about that you think that they should be looking into?
Oh, I have one message for everyone. It's go out and recruit anyone that you know that you think is valuable to Indiana. Call them up and tell them to move here. I want everyone to do that.
I love that idea. Well, thanks, Phil. Thanks for the support of the podcast today, and I'm proud to call you a colleague and trusted friend as well. So we appreciate you being here with us.
It's my pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
That was a great discussion with Bill. Bill's such a great guy, and I'm so happy we had an opportunity to learn from his various experiences and his concentration on culture from day one is a great lesson. Now I think we should connect again with Professor Tim Fort to talk about what we called in previous episodes the magic numbers. So let's get to Tim.
Tim, thanks so much for joining us again.
Great, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we are too. We're really excited to talk to you today. One of the aspects of a discussion that we had a couple weeks ago when you were on was about the neurological limitations of groups, and there were a couple different magic numbers there. Maybe you could walk us through and remind our listeners of the various magic numbers from a neurological aspect.
Sure, happy to. So this is research that I was doing, oh gosh, 15, 20 years ago or so, and it's really stuck with me over the time that when you go to a company, sometimes, I use an example, you walk onto an airplane and you hear the attendant says, "Welcome to the American Airlines family," or the United Airlines family, or whatever. I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't know what it means to be a family with an organization with 100,000 employees, and that got me thinking. What does it mean to have a connection with a company, or to be working for a company, and you feel like you're in a family atmosphere, that your actions make a difference, that when you say something, it's heard. Doesn't necessarily that you win the argument, but that your viewpoints are heard. And so I was doing research on this, and I came across a lot of, and worked with an archaeologist, PhD student actually, for about 6 years when I worked up at the University of Michigan. And we identified several different breaking points of the sizes of groups in which people are, I'm going to just say for right now, most comfortable. And those grouped or magic numbers, if you will, are 4 to 6, 30, and 150. I think of it this way. There are 4 to 6 people that you can feel comfortable of having a conversation with at any one time. If you're at a cocktail party or something like that, I've actually had students challenge you or research this, and they've said, you're exactly right, that you'll see 4 to 6 people that are having a conversation. But if it gets above that number of people, the group will fission like an amoeba in a high school science experiment, and will just break apart because it's too difficult for you to have a conversation with a group bigger than that, unless there's one person in that group that everybody thinks is really, really super important, and so they all want to suck up to the person, and so they're willing to just listen. But other than
That's
that,
not
to
something
actually
I've
have
ever. That's not something I've ever encountered. Let me tell you.
So, but 4 to 6, you get above that, it's harder to work in that, and businesses see this. If you're working in teams or in a classroom, if I have a group project, I would never put someone in a group of more than 4 to 6 because it's just too hard to do. So that's the first one. It's how to have a conversation, really. We'll put it that way for now. Then 30 is actually 30 is um, uh, if you follow evolutionary theory, 30 was the average number of people in a hunter-gatherer group. 25 or 30, and those were people who lived together on a daily basis. They interacted with a daily basis. They moved around together. And the argument from anthropologists is that we lived in hunter-gatherer societies for 98 to 99% of human history. And our brains are still wired to be most comfortable with that size of a group where there's a ready identification with others. There's also more contemporary evidence that show that for if you have a work group in a company that's bigger than 30 and you start adding people to that group, that the number of disputes that break out in the group increase not arithmetically for every person that you add, but exponentially. There's something that goes haywire if you get too many people kind of working together on the same kind of a project. And then the third number is 150, which was popularized by research done by Robin Dunbar, who I've heard him described as a paleontologist, a bioanthropologist, evolutionary psychologist. I'm not sure exactly what the exact right term for him was or is, but back in 1996, he released a book called Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language. And actually what he was looking at is why human beings speak better than other creatures. And one argument is that we have bigger brains than other creatures. And we do have big brains. I mean, when we're babies, we can't even hold our head up. But if you actually, whales and elephants have bigger brains than what we do, and we seem to talk better than both of those species, although both of them do have some significant communicative capability. But Dunbar went a little bit further, and he looked at evidence that shows the size of the neocortex, which is the thin membrane of the brain that is generally, somewhat controversially, but generally believed to be responsible for a lot of cognitive processing, our language, our music, our thinking capability. And he noticed that this part of the brain, the neocortex, compared to our body mass, is very large in human beings and in other primates, but particularly in human beings. He also noticed that there was a certain size of groups that our primate cousins would live in, and then they would break apart because they couldn't sustain themselves in a certain size. And so I'm just using this as an example. I don't remember if this was Dunbar's example, that a group of orangutans might live in a group of 20, and they get the 21st one born into the group, and the group will break into 11 and 10, and there's a ceiling of the sizes of group. So based on that evidence of neocortex ratio compared to community size, he tried to predict what would be the maximum size of a group that people would feel, again, most comfortable or at home with. And the number he came up with was 150 for human beings. Well, this is all great esoteric stuff, but in addition to that, he came up with some contemporary evidence that showed that 150 was kind of a ceiling for us. Now, remember, 1996 is before we got smartphones. And so one of his data points was an address book, things we used before smartphones, and the average number of names in a person's address book was 150. The average size of the company unit in the military for hundreds of years around the world is 150. When Brigham Young moved the Mormons from Nauvoo, Illinois to Utah, he said, "I can't coordinate 5,000 people. I will break them into groups of 150, and they can coordinate themselves, and I'll coordinate the leaders." The Church of England did a study of the optimum size of a congregation so that it would not be so big that the people in the congregation will lose a sense of the joys and concerns of other members. The number they came up with is 180 to 200. There's something that goes along that you just, as Dunbar put it, at any one time during your life, that there's 150 people that if you saw one of them at a bar, you'd feel comfortable pulling up a chair and having a beer with them. But there's probably only that number. And you get beyond that, and this is where I start moving it into normative and cultural dimensions, that you lose a sense of the consequences of your action. And that's important because if you don't think that your actions make a difference to another person, it's much easier to dismiss them as being important. You can do whatever you want. Who's going to get hurt? Who cares? But if you recognize that your actions make a difference to someone, then you're going to coordinate or you're going to think about your actions because you know they have a consequence. It doesn't necessarily mean that you love the other person, but there's a consequence to what you do. And so you moderate your behavior or you adjust your behavior in order to stay within that group. So those are the three numbers. There are some other bigger than that, but those are the three basic numbers: 4 to 6, 30, and 150.
That is just absolutely fascinating stuff.
It's fun, and I do think it has impact for companies too, because we want our people in our organizations. We want them to be ethical. We want to create the cultures that support them being ethical. We just don't want to leave it up to them to be honest. We want to create a culture that encourages them to be honest. Well, one way you do that may well be to put them in the sizes of organizations so that the size of the organization is reinforcing the kind of conduct that you want them to perform.
Okay, so I'm thinking about these various uh, uh, numbers, and you had a armed service um, reference, and I like that. You have a squad of 4 to 6, you have a platoon of 30, and a company of 150, and that seems uh, like the armed services over the many decades of studying the ideal numbers came to the same conclusion that you have. And I really enjoy this idea of really to define why is it 150, what is the impact of 150, and it's losing the sense of the consequences of your actions beyond 150. So to me, that's the neurological aspect of the magic number of 150. Beyond that number, you lose the sense of the consequences of your actions.
That's exactly my framework too. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm proposing, Greg. Yeah. Now, of course, we live in bigger organizations than that. We live in a country of 300 million people, or we have a company of 10,000 employees and things like that. So, I mean, it's not that we can't be in an organization bigger than 150. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary, but it is that once you get beyond those numbers, you really have to think about how you're going to create your organization so that it is still encouraging the kind of behavior you want, and how you're going. I mean, think of that example I gave with Brigham Young. He had 5,000 people that he was moving from Nauvoo, Illinois to Utah, and he said, well, in 150 they can coordinate themselves, but then I can coordinate their leaders. And so there's a way there to have a bigger organization, but still try to keep them together in some sort of a cohesive group. And those are, and we do that in a variety of ways. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great, maybe. But I mean, just think, a simple example that isn't going to create maybe a whole lot of ethical behavior itself, but just think of the way that you identify with someone if they're wearing the same shirt as your alma mater. And so you're both IU graduates, and you see you both have IU. Hey, we're alums together. I mean, you've got a sense of identity that helps you connect with them. Now, does that really help an awful lot on a daily basis in terms of how you conduct yourself? Well, if you're above that group of 150, maybe not, but it is a way to give you a sense of identity with someone else. Or think of stay with sports in colleges for a second, that you all sing the same song. You all have the same means. Songs and music, national anthems, school songs are also a way to give us, a sense of togetherness of our identity. On a little bit more perhaps troubling, or it can be troubling basis, there's the classic us versus them. All believe in our side because we all agree that while all us may have problems, the other people are really bad. And so we're going to, hate the other people, and that gives us a sense of identity. So, I mean, there's lots of things with language, with what we wear, with our groups that can allow us to extend beyond that. It's just that if you really want people to take into account how they are treating other people, that's where those neurological limitations really come into play.
So I think we have, you've given us a great understanding of how all of these magic numbers, as we've we've started calling them, they mark a big change to human interaction. But you went over a couple of ways where we've managed to kind of, beyond the 150 numbers, still live in these cooperative populations, whether it's a school or a company or what have you. I wonder, we've talked previously about values on the podcast and company values. Do you think having values that everyone can kind of circle around can help give a sense of community? I think about ArchiMed, a big value for us is respect. And that, to me, that's one of like our very core values. And even just rallying around that, whether you've met the person face to face or not, just having that respectful communication, do you think that is something that can help us move past that 150 number successfully?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth there. That's a great example. The answer is yes, I do. I do think that value statements and mission statements and things like that are a way to get people to rally around a common way of conducting themselves, because they all have a buy-in that this is an important thing for me. I think that a couple of ways to really reinforce that is that I think it is good if someone is being hired to let them know these are our values, so that the person then is making a choice that if I'm going to be working here, that I'm kind of accepting those values, and those values sound okay to me. I think that that's a good step. Another thing that I think is very helpful, if you give people the opportunity to say what they believe their values are. And I've done this exercise. I may have mentioned it in the last interview that we did. I've done this exercise in my class where I start the class by saying, what kind of values would you like to see in an organization in which you work? I mean, I've done this hundreds of times. And because everybody says, well, if you ask 50 people what their values are, you'll come up with 50 different answers. And there'll be 50 different things that 50 different people put up on the board at this point. But then I say, okay, which one are the seven that are most important? And the same ones get elected time and time again. Respect is one of those. Honesty, integrity, respect, usually have some creativity, teamwork, accountability. Those things, there is a consensus that those are important. But if you've given people the chance to say they're important, then they have an even greater sense of buy-in that these are really important things, because I just had a chance to voice what I thought was important. So I think having a code of conduct or value statement is a good first step. A second step is to give people the opportunity to demonstrate their voice. And the third way, I wrote a book a few years ago with a co-author over in Denmark, Countess Alexandra in Denmark, and we interviewed 20 executives, 10 from the U.S., 10 from Northern Europe, and we asked those CEOs, what are the factors that really help create an ethical corporate culture? And not surprisingly, I mean, you see this time and time again, it's tone at the top. So if you want to have a company where respect is a key virtue, to the extent that the people in the leadership are demonstrating respect, goes a long way for people to say this is real, that they're being accountable for this too, that they respect us. And so again, there are ways to make people feel that they have bought in and that their values are replicated even beyond that 150. But then again, if you put them into the work groups where they can actually see that, that further reinforces things.
And just for our listeners' sake, that book that Tim referenced is called The Sincerity Edge, and I recommend it. And we'll put a link in the comment section so that folks can find it easily. Tim, I wanted to ask you about uh, I, the idea or the cadence of asking folks to contribute to the establishment of values. So we have a set of values, and they've been on the wall for 7, 8 years now. And how often would we want to revisit that? Or we also have hired so many people since those have been developed. What is the right cadence to ask people to contribute to the value statement?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have a specific time limit or a timeline issue of when to do it. I think that's going to be more art than it's science at that point of when do you feel that the organization has reached a point where there's so much new blood that you really need to go back and re-examine or give everybody a chance to speak. I'll use my department as an example. The Kelley School of Business has the largest business ethics faculty in the world. And when we came here 7 years ago, when I came here 8 years ago, one of the first things we did was we kind of created what we called aims and commitments to each other of what we were going to owe each other in terms of making sure our grades didn't get too high and they all had a writing assignment and stuff like that. And last year I realized that we had gone from 4 people to 16 people in a period of 6 years. Now that's still well within the 30 number that we've been talking about, but I said there are so many new people here that have never, we've never really talked about them. They've seen the aims and commitments, but we never really talked to them. Let's go back and talk to them for a little bit. It was really very good. So that was about a 6 year differential, but that was my art to it. I mean, that was my call there, and I don't. It would depend on each company of which one or what time limit they were looking for. But there's one other thing that I would say that I'm a firm believer in, and that is if you've got retreats or a day off retreat or a 2-day retreat, and companies have these for all kinds of reasons, to give people in those retreats the opportunity to tell their stories about something that they saw in work that they thought was good, or what the values that they saw in work in those retreat. My guess is, again, because the same things keep coming up again, that those small groups would articulate the values that you could say, okay, so you think these important, and they're on the wall too. And so I don't think you necessarily have to have a company election every 7 years or every 10 years or something like that. But again, the idea is giving people the voice to express what is important to them, again, maybe over a table of 6 people, and then to connect what they just said with the values that the company has is another way for them to be able to reinforce those values and give them a voice. Well, I think that the bigger that you get, the harder it is to maintain that familial kind of an atmosphere, or that it's not going to be a familiar atmosphere in necessarily the same way. It may be that your Indianapolis-based group has that in a different way than the one in Madison, Wisconsin, or something like that, wherever your locations are. So you may still be able to have that familial dimension to it. And if it's consistent, that is, that everybody does have the same values, then it's easier for those two groups to be able to find each other and to still have a little bit of a sense of that. But to have a real sense of, I'm in it with my fellow family members. I mean, there are those limitations there, and those there it won't be quite the same once you get a bigger size. That doesn't mean you still can't have a good sense of being in it together and to being a kind of a community, but it is going to be a little bit different. One of the distinctions that I made early in my writing was the difference between what I call a mediating institution and a community. A mediating institution is one of these organizations that are with 150 limit. And there's a whole bunch of sociology that goes along with that. Whereas a community may be bigger than that, and it may share a lot of those values, but it's not just quite as intimate. So you may have communal values that are very, very consistent with each other and give people a good communal feeling, which is good. But it's not going to be quite that familial mediating institution dimension that's just more intimate.
Yeah, Tim, that's really helpful to hear, because that's sort of where I was going with how I view Archimate as a community. And even if and when we get above 150, and it looks like we will in the nearer term, I hope that we'll still work for that common sense of identity through creating community. And then the last question I have for you is when you create groups of 30, say by department, can you create other groups of 30 that are sort of cross-departmental? So maybe all the team leads make up a group of 30, all the department heads make up a group of 30, the leadership team, etc. And so that you're a member of a number of different groups of 30, where you have that ready identification, and then also that larger sense of a larger community company wide.
I think that I not only think that is essential, not to get grandiose here, but I think that is the key to the entire country right now. That these notions of mediating institutions actually were coined by sociologists to talk about how in communities that we have memberships in different mediating institutions, so that you're part of a business, you're part of a church, you're part of a bowling club, you're part of a choral group or whatever, you're part of a softball team. And in those different kinds of membership, you humanize those other people who are in there. So if you otherwise disagree on a political or a social issue, it's not quite as bitter, because, yeah, I disagree with Bob, but he's still my teammate on the baseball team, so I can't get that mad at him. And I think that there's a whole notion of decency and civility that is promoted when you've got cross-cutting memberships in different kinds of mediating institutions. And that's true in business as well. That if you have cross-cutting memberships, so that you are a member of this work group, but you also have cross-cutting memberships in a management team or a cross-functional team, that humanizes all those other people and goes a long way to be able to make sure that you never get into, or that you reduce the likelihood of getting into us versus them kinds of competition. I think that is very healthy, and I think that is really crucial in a company and really in the whole country right now.
I couldn't agree more. Professor Tim Fort, thanks for joining us. Tim is professor of ethics and business law at Kelley School of Business, and also an author. And don't forget to check out the comment section for a link to his book, The Sincerity Edge. Thank you so much, Tim. Appreciate that you joined us today.
Thank you all very much. Great questions.
Well, I loved learning about those neurological numbers from Tim. I know last time that really caught mine and Greg's attention, so I'm happy we got to go back and talk to him more about it. And I think the moral is it's really kind of baked into us, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Those numbers, I think we need to pay attention to those, and they're turning points in the evolution of our company, and that's an opportunity to revisit how we approach culture. So, Caroline, what did we learn today?
Well, I mean, from Bill, I feel like I learned a lot. We learned that you should start thinking about culture from day one. This is one of his top priorities between him and Angie. And as Bill said, we're going to have a culture, and they either needed to manage it or it would manage them. And we also learned about the power of simplicity as it relates to cultural pillars. We don't want these things to be difficult to follow. We want people to be easily able to pick them up and really live by them.
Yeah, a couple of my favorite of his pillars. One is be honest, and that's a simple but guiding light. And the other is enjoy your job or quit. And I mean, life's too short for anything else. If you can swing it, enjoy your job or quit is a great way to approach it.
Yeah, and I mean, as they grew, Angie's List did try to centralize hiring, but they found, it butted heads with their belief in empowering people by removing that managerial discretion, and so they went back to their original way of hiring, and they just learned that you really need to think about culture and allow people to weigh in and take into consideration what people are really believing and want when you're making all these important decisions.
Yeah, and they recognized that and weren't afraid to pivot and change things so that it was aligned with their culture. Bill gave us a couple cool programs to consider. Open mic night, I think he called it, is when he got in front of his entire employee base and they could ask him anything they wanted. I think it's sort of similar to what Kevin and I do as owners, meeting with everybody at Archimed, sort of on a quarterly basis. And then, Caroline, can we please finally institute the lunch program now that it has Bill Oesterle's blessing?
Yes, I think we need to give it a serious look. And I will say, since we talked to Bill, I actually had an employee come up to me completely out of the blue with no knowledge of our conversation with Bill request a similar program. So I think things are heating up, and I think we can finally make it happen.
Yeah, awesome. From Tim, we learned again about these magic numbers. There's one that's between 4 and 6, or the Army squad, and there's one that's 30, which is the platoon, and then there's one that's 150, which is the company.
Yeah, and I mean, as we grow, we definitely need to manage beyond what we are wired to do. And, you mentioned it. I think we're kind of bound to change as we grow, but that doesn't mean that has to be a bad thing. And learning about how to enhance our culture as we grow instead of just letting it do whatever it wants and kind of run amok.
Yeah, and if we grow, we will grow beyond these special numbers. And one thing Tim said is we could create departments of certain sizes, so 30, let's say, and then create a cross-department group of 30. This could be team leads or department leads or a leadership team, so that we can grow beyond 150 without abandoning the neurology. So employees can belong to one or more of these smaller groups. So let's say you're in a certain department of 30 and you're also a team lead, so you connect with other team leads, and that's a group of 30. And then sort of an overarching connection is that strong common identity, that strong sense of belonging to the Archimed community. So I think that approach can go a long way once you get above the 150.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think regardless of how connected you are to any one person, having that backbone of what your company believes in and stands for, and having people that can really get behind it, I think is crucial. I mean, that way we're at least all speaking the same language and we're all working towards the same goals. And, as you said, Greg, have that strong common identity that helps us along the way.
On our next episode, we will discuss how to engage all your stakeholders in culture.